Hello there girls and boys, today I'm gonna introduce you to a recording method that is gonna totally upgrade the sound of your guitars. Here we go! Hey, welcome back to the channel. As said before, today I'm gonna be talking about wet, dry, wet, or also known as WDW, recording or guitar sound setup. And this means the following. When you're dealing with a wet, dry, wet signal, girls and boys, you're gonna be dividing the sound of your guitar into three different outputs. One of them carrying the totally dry, also known as the non-affected signal of your guitar, and the other two signals are going to be dealing with the entirety of the affected sound. For example, the delay sound. This brings plenty of benefits to your sound, including a much more clearer and better recorded guitar track, especially when you're dealing with leads, and in case you're dealing with rhythmic guitar, it's gonna make your sound wide and powerful. So stay tuned because this is extremely useful. But before we go, if this is your first time on the channel, I welcome you, because here I show you every single thing I do in order to create, write, produce, and of course perform my music live. Because I know that making a living as a musician is not a dream, it's a possibility. And if I can do it, of course you can do it. With that being said, let's get into it. This technique is bringing the sound of the studio to the live setting. We're going to be using a splitter or a mixer to divide the signal from our guitar into three different amplifiers. One of them is going to be dealing with the center signal, the dry signal, and the other two will be dealing with the wet or the effects. In this video I will be showing you two different approaches, one of them using an analog rig and another one is going to be based on just using plugins. If you're going analog, here is what you need. You will need first a proper splitter, and in this case I decided to use the JHS splitter box, which is a fantastic and extremely affordable pedal that actually splits the signal into two, retaining the quality of the signal itself. When it comes to the wet signals, you would need an effects unit that outputs on stereo, and for this application I would be dealing and using my Eventide pitch factor. Now the tricky part. My guitar is going into the input of my amplifier, which is outputting the dry signal into the first cabinet. Then I'm gonna take the send output of the loopback on the amp to feed the JHS splitter box, and I'm gonna use one of the outputs to feed the return of the amp, and another one is gonna be sent directly into the Eventide, which is gonna split the signal into two, feeding both the L and R wet signals. Complex, right? The biggest benefit of this workflow is the fact that you can control the sound of your guitar without having to worry too much about how much of the effect is being applied to your signal. Let me explain. We're gonna be recording our guitar using one track, just recording the dry signal, the unaffected signal, leaving room for our equalization and post-producing in a much more controlled and directed fashion. By dividing the signal into two, we would be able to apply effects while mixing on both the dry signal or the wet signal without affecting one or the other, allowing us to correct any problem with equalization on an individual basis. And also we would be able to control the amount of volume for each, allowing us to get a much better sounding guitar track. And on a personal note, the fact that I'm able to record my guitar in this fashion allows me to convey more emotion to my playing because I feel more connected to the sound, because it's closer to what I do in the studio. Just keep in mind that you will have to commit to wherever you record and wherever sound you come up with if you're dealing with an analog recording rig. In contrast, if you're dealing with plugins, you will have basically an infinite of possibilities, including during the mixing process. The problem is that you would be tempted to come up with something new because the possibility of modifying your parameters, it's always there. So be careful with that. Okay, this sounds amazing, but it's extremely complex, isn't it? I hear you say. And I gotta tell you, well, you're right, it's kinda complex, and the more you spend on it, the more complex it can get. And sometimes, especially when dealing with live signal and live sound, these might not be the most effective approaches. Yet, plenty of musicians use this as their regular setup on a daily basis, including myself. Now, let me show you how it works. For this example, I'll be using a technique that you should be familiar with if you've been following the channel for a while. I'm talking about reamping. And just as a quick reminder, I am outputting the signal of my guitar, the pre-recorded signal without any effects, from the output 11 of my interface. That's hitting the front end of my amp, and then I'm using a Reverb mini rock rack to send the output of my amplifier into my interface. And then I'm gonna be using this IR loader made by THU to recreate the sound of my cabinet. We got this. Now that we got the dry signal going, let's get started on the wet. I will be creating a second channel. This time around is gonna be an stereo track, and it's gonna be fed with input number 3 and 4 on my interface, receiving the sound of the even side as I explained before. Now that we finally balanced the volume of both signals, it's time to record. Here we go. Job done. Now let's take a look at using plugins. As usual, let's take a look first at what we're going to be dealing with. That's a really good sound, especially when considering that we are dealing with actually plugins. Now, what we're going to be doing is the following. I will create a synth, an auxiliary track, and then on that auxiliary track, I'm going to insert the effect that I want to apply to my guitar. In this case, it's going to be a delay unit. Talking about delays, we'll be dealing with one of my favorite plugins ever. That's Echo Boy by the fine people at Soundtoys. This technique is also known as parallel mixing, and for this to work, we gotta make sure that the plugin is set to full mix. Good, but I think the sound of the delay is quite loud, so let's first find a proper balance between the dry and the wet signals. I'm gonna lower the volume and I'm gonna be bringing it back little by little. Here we go. Now you realize that we can keep modifying the parameters on our wet signal for as much as we want. That can be addictive. How about that? I totally think that this is a great way to record guitar, and it's gonna push the way that you develop your sounds even further. I gotta tell you, it's kinda cumbersome, and when you compare the analog version to the digital recreation that I show you, one is much more efficient than the other. So it's up to you. If you like to support this channel, the best way to do it is by listening to music on Apple Music or Spotify, and also by following us on social media such as Instagram, because that's the best way for you to get in touch with us in a much more personal basis. Now, girls and boys, every single time that I meet you, I gotta remind you something. Never, ever, ever let anybody tell you what to dream about. And remember that I will see you when I see you.